NASA says right now is a wonderful, important opportunity to zero in on the world Venus. This follows the new openness of possible life on the world. In the event that you somehow end up researching NASA's records from the 1960s, you'd see the Space Association calling Venus a planet of judgment. In the meantime, Mars became our primary target. Such careful naming of the most significant planets wasn't an event. During the wild space race period, the Soviet Union was focused on sending costly missions to Venus. The shocking planet showed generally no opportunities for life, yet the Soviet space program didn't decommission the Venera program until the fall of the USSR. On account of Neil deGrasse Tyson, we finally understand why. Join us as we check the declassified photos from Venus taken by the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union was dynamic in more ways than one. Not only did it change the global course of the world, but the collapse of the empire also sank many secrets with it. The fact that the Soviets had a significant bias for secrets, from running the most secretive intelligence agency in the world to being cryptic about their true abilities regarding extraterrestrial contact, suggests that the former superpower holds numerous untold secrets. Before the United States of America overtook most planetary attempts in space, the Soviet Union was leading the game. While the USSR had a long history of both successful and unsuccessful space missions, its most prominent focus was on the very opposing planet Venus. In the Russian language, you'd see Venus as Venera, and thus the name of the mission that endured from 1961 to 1983. During the same time, the US was busy sending its missions to the moon. So, in a way, the Soviets decided to use their resources elsewhere. We can't say that the entire obsession with the second planet from our sun is odd. Did the Soviets desire to use the planet's surface as a feasible and uniquely prepared power establishment? Or were they maybe looking to colonize the planet after searching for any forms of life up there? It's really difficult to say why the Soviets focused on the terrible planet, since they conducted these missions during the Cold War. They weren't entirely open about their objectives. In truth, all we know about the Venusian missions relies on declassified and unarchived information. Yet, after so much, it's hard to pinpoint what the Soviets were looking for and if they ever uncovered the secrets of Venus. The Soviets didn't land on Venus once or even twice, but multiple times. That is at least true. The Soviets launched 28 costly rockets to the stunning planet, and 13 of those entered the Venusian atmosphere, while 8 actually landed. Such complex missions put the Soviets in a leading position in space exploration. Sure, the US was a close second, but NASA was more interested in satellites and innovative technology than looking for life on planets. Its attention was on Mars, which, in turn, wasn't particularly extraordinary or especially bad. Your history textbook may not tell you this, but the Soviet space program was the first to send a probe into the atmosphere of a planet other than Earth. It also had another set of firsts on its record. The USSR became the first state to achieve a soft landing on another planet, bringing back pictures and sounds from the surface of that planet. In fact, the Soviets had their own one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind moment well before the US. So why do we rarely hear about such achievements? Recall what we said about the Soviet tendency to keep secrets. That's just one of many reasons for the oversight of the Soviet space program. Back in 1992, the prominent organization was decommissioned in the aftermath of the USSR, and the agency had to be revived under a new Russian identity, Roscosmos. A lot of its original records were either lost or destroyed. This is precisely why we don't have a clear answer for why the Soviets launched 28 rockets into the Venusian atmosphere. Still, we can make the most reasonable speculation. Perhaps the Soviet decision to explore Venus was more about cost-effectiveness than anything else. It isn't to say that the space program wasn't aware of the planet's true potential. They were looking for functional water, levels of sunlight radiation, and the general characteristics of the planet. Without a series of these space missions, it would have been incredibly challenging to assess Venus' high temperatures and thick atmosphere. Today, many astronomers don't believe that the hostile planet could support life. The temperatures up there are high enough to melt lead, and water is scarce. Moreover, due to its dense air, the atmospheric pressure on Venus is typically about 90 times that of Earth. At any rate, these are very recent advancements, and to ignore the USSR's contribution to the exploration of Venus is like rewriting history. As far as the Soviets were concerned, Venus was worth exploring, even if it was just to fuel the space race. You see, looking at other more hospitable planets like Mars wasn't completely off the table. However, it was more expensive than sending probes to Venus. Everything essentially comes down to the distance from Earth to another celestial body. On average, the hostile planet is only 40 million kilometers away from our home, while Mars is on average 250 million kilometers away. Such vast differences in distance result in huge differences in cost. Moreover, if the US wasn't the world's largest economy, it couldn't have explored Mars as easily. Other reports suggest that Soviet missions were dangerous and had significant technical gaps. Clearly, the spacecraft weren't equipped to cover vast distances. Additionally, the agency had a poor history of losing contact with its rockets. So, it makes sense why the Soviet space program chose a more sensible and closer mission that would yield results. However, if we don't consider the space race in this context, the story of the Venera missions would be incomplete. The US wasn't even on the space map when the Soviet program launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik 1, in 1957. This move kicked off the space race and maintained its momentum. At any rate, what's truly fascinating is the reason why the US focused on the Moon instead of Venus. NASA had a series of failures with its Venus missions during the 1960s, and as a result, the US Space Agency hit a deadlock known as the Venus Curse. Each time they launched a probe into the Venusian atmosphere, it turned out poorly. This was precisely when the Soviet Union saw an opportunity to benefit from NASA's failures. At that time, both the US and the Soviets were determined to win the space race. The best strategy was to exploit two distinct opportunities. It was a quiet yet decisive strategy. The Soviet space program seized Earth's sister planet as the most important accomplishment in the space race, achieving something its major rival had neglected to do. Despite the empire's limited resources and bungled government, it repeatedly sent missions to Venus to secure its victorious position against the US. Compared to NASA's focus on the Moon, this strategic division wasn't without ill will. Additionally, tricky propaganda was used to obscure their major failures with Venus. The American government was prompted to criticize the USSR's fixation on the planet in the media. Venus was labeled the evil planet, while Mars became humanity's destiny. These labels didn't matter to the Soviets. Their mission was to prove their superiority over the Americans, and they were successful in doing so. The Venera missions are almost forgotten in modern history. However, despite their early setbacks, those missions were exceptionally refined, advanced, and ambitious. Indeed, at the start of the space age, the Venera missions led the way. Looking back to the 1950s, the Soviets began experimenting with the design and technical details of the probes. For the next 30 years, they continued to build and launch interplanetary spacecraft as part of the Venera program. Since the program was running alongside a very turbulent Cold War, the Soviets focused on improving their assets. Fortunately for them, the early years of the conflict gave them more resources than the US, which turned out to be exceptionally valuable. It allowed them to build larger rockets designed to break through high altitudes and cover significant distances. The Soviets rushed to experiment with both manned and unmanned rockets, while the Soviet intellectual community was working on a series of computations and evaluations to create accurate trajectories for the Venus missions. Behind the scenes, their Mars programs were also running. For the Soviet space program, nothing was more important than developing advanced instrumentation for these probes. This led to the greatest breakthroughs in the history of space exploration. In 1966, the Soviet Union launched Venera 3, making it the first artificial probe to enter the atmosphere of Venus and successfully land on the planet's surface. This milestone intensified the competition between the two superpowers. Unlike the American missions, which were plagued by failures and gridlocks, the Soviet program continued to make progress. Despite their advancements, the USSR managed to send successful probes into the Venusian atmosphere. The key issue with this approach was limited design capacity. The Soviets quickly overcame their design issues and launched the most advanced probes of the Venera program during the 1970s. Their pioneering efforts allowed them to achieve the first simultaneous launches of Venera 4 and Venera 5. According to most historians, This was the most exciting decade in the history of space exploration. Undoubtedly, the U.S. attempted to develop similar launch designs, so why did the Soviet agency choose concurrent launches into Venus? To understand this, you need to realize that interplanetary travel requires advanced instrumentation to gather the highest level of data and evidence. The probe was initially launched to study the planet's surface, and that was exactly what happened with Venera 4. Since the launch went smoothly, the probe entered Venus' atmosphere successfully. The Soviet program continued with Venera 5, but this wasn't simply a repeat of the first launch. The second probe was specifically designed to gather detailed data about the planet. Ultimately, the Soviets wanted to survive the obstacles of temperature, atmospheric pressure, and radiation on Venus. They didn't have to wait too long for their answers. By the mid-1970s, the Soviet program was entering the most advanced phase of the Venera missions. Everything the USSR had done up to that point was about innovation and development. It was about ensuring that their plans and advancements were more sophisticated. It was also about perfecting the techniques and mechanics of interplanetary travel. For the second decade of the Venera missions, the Soviet Union intended to conduct exploratory missions. The most remarkable and exciting launch of this period was Venera 7. As the 11th Soviet probe entered Venus' atmosphere, it became the first spacecraft to send back data from another planet. By this point, the planet's high temperatures, density, and surface pressures were already noted. The Soviets were attempting to record Venusian sounds. The next major achievement for the program came in the mid-1980s. Venera 13 surpassed all previous interplanetary missions in terms of complexity. This spacecraft was the first to capture panoramic pictures of Venus' surface. At the same time, the Soviet program launched Venera 14 to gather similar information about the planet's surface. As the Soviet Union was perhaps the first country to recognize Venus, the Russian Space Agency has revived its ambitions for Venus missions. Venera is an upcoming joint mission between Roscosmos and NASA to investigate the climate and surface of Venus. The name Venera represents Venus in Russian. It's expected to launch in the late 2020s or early 2030s and plans to study the planet's atmosphere, geological history, and search for signs of any current or past habitability. The spacecraft will include an orbiter, a lander, and possibly an inflatable to study the planet's atmosphere in detail. The legacy of the Venera mission stretches far beyond their technical accomplishments and global implications. These missions, started by the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, represented a pinnacle of human imagination and determination in exploring the universe. Despite facing numerous challenges and obstacles, the Soviets persevered in their mission to uncover the secrets of Venus, a planet long believed to be hostile and uninhabitable. One of the most pivotal aspects of the Venera missions was their pioneering use of robotic probes to study planetary conditions and surfaces. These missions paved the way for future exploration beyond Earth's sphere and laid the foundation for our understanding of planetary science. The data gathered by the Venera spacecraft provided important insights into Venus' extreme environment, including its searing temperatures, crushing atmospheric pressure, and toxic atmosphere dominated by carbon dioxide. Moreover, the technological advancements achieved through the Venera program had broader implications for space exploration, including the development of heat-resistant materials, reliable communication systems, and dependable landing techniques. These accomplishments contributed to subsequent missions to other planets like Mars and beyond. The lessons learned from the Venera missions continue to inform spacecraft design and operational strategies in contemporary space exploration endeavors. Beyond their scientific and technological importance, the Venera missions also had significant social and political ramifications during the space race era. These missions symbolized the rivalry between superpowers for dominance in space exploration. For the Soviet Union, succeeding with the Venera missions was not just about scientific discovery but also about demonstrating technological prowess and ideological superiority over the U.S. The global community closely observed each Venera mission, recognizing their importance in expanding humanity's understanding of the solar system. The successful soft landing of Venera 7 on Venus in 1970 marked a significant achievement as the first spacecraft to transmit data from another planet's surface. This accomplishment highlighted the Soviet Union's ability to overcome the enormous challenges posed by Venus' harsh conditions. In addition to scientific instruments, the Venera spacecraft carried cameras that captured the first close-up images of Venus' surface. These images revealed a rugged landscape dominated by rocky plains and volcanic features, providing scientists with crucial geological insights into the planet's history and evolution. The panoramic photos taken by later missions like Venera 13 and 14 further enhanced our understanding of Venus' surface morphology and composition. Despite their successes, the Venera missions also faced their share of failures and challenges. Some missions either failed to reach Venus or experienced technical breakdowns that prevented them from transmitting data back to Earth. The challenges of operating in Venus' extreme environment, including temperatures exceeding 450 degrees Celsius (842 degrees Fahrenheit) and corrosive sulfuric acid clouds, posed significant engineering difficulties for spacecraft design and operation. Nonetheless, the determination and dedication of Soviet scientists and engineers involved in the Venera program paved the way for future missions to Venus and other celestial bodies. The legacy of the Venera missions continues in the ongoing exploration of Venus by space agencies worldwide, including NASA's upcoming Venus mission in collaboration with Roscosmos. Looking ahead, the Venera mission aims to build on the achievements of its predecessors by sending advanced instruments to study Venus' atmosphere, surface geology, and potential signs of past or present habitability. The mission represents a collaborative effort to unravel the remaining mysteries of Earth's closest planetary neighbor and expand our understanding of the conditions that could support life beyond our own planet.